Welcome everybody. What do white researchers need to hear? So it's my last job before signing off to hand over to Shannon. Shannon and I have known each other for quite a while in social media. More recently, we've done some webinars together on things like online qualitative research and the future of things. But I was really struck by a post that Shannon shared a little while ago about your comfort is no longer my concern. And this resonated with some of the things I was hearing, that maybe people like me weren't actually hearing what we needed to hear. We were talking to each other.
Something went wrong. Try again in a few seconds.
That was Google Home telling me that something went wrong. And I think they're right. We were talking to each other, a lot of white researchers, about what do we think the problem is? What can we do? And of course, instead of talking, we should really have been listening. So I'm going to start listening now, and I'm going to hand over to Shannon. Shannon, the floor's all yours.
Perfect. Funny that your Google device said that something is wrong, because that's really our message for today, that there are a number of things that are wrong, and not just what we're seeing in society, which does also manifest itself equally in the insights and research industry, but also in the research that we conduct. So I hope that most of you guys have been able to look at the article, White People, Your Comfort is Not Our Problem, because it does, in a brief way, get to some of what it is that we as people in the insights, research, and marketing world experience and go through and think about on a day-to-day basis. What I want to say is that the conversation we're having right now, it isn't new. The words that are leaving my mouth that you're going to hear from the others aren't new. The need for our voices to be heard as Black people also is not new. And what's also not new is the fact that you don't see many of us when you walk into a conference in industry, or you even walk into a workplace. And that needs to change. It's not that we aren't around. It's not that we can't be found. There are things in a way, both visible and invisible, that need to be fixed. And the fixing does not need to, or should not only be on the shoulders of us Black people. We can only change so much when we're the minority, when white people are the majority. The change needs to start with you, and the change needs to be done in partnership with us, but not always necessarily driven by us. A question that was asked to me is why we're only focusing on Black people in the session. And the reason because of that is because it's time. What have we been hearing in the news over the last few months? Not that those things are new either, but it is time. We can't always focus on everybody, because if we focus on everybody, then nothing gets done and nothing is improved. It is time to focus on Black researchers and increasing Black researchers and making Black researchers feel more welcome in the industry. One of the last points is that we're also not complaining in this session either. We just want to lay out what it is that we're experiencing and what it is that we're seeing. Charles M. Blow, a fabulous New York Times journalist, there's something he had written in an article recently that really resonated with me. I really put the words that I've been wanting to say down in a great way. And he says, "It is exhausting and infuriating and maddening to be forced to fight always for what others is free. It enrages when you realize that you're still fighting the same fight that your parents fought and that their parents fought. It is an everyday struggle to neither fall into despair nor explode in anger. Every day something is happening, whether it's over the phone because we're all mostly home, or in the office, and every day we are processing things that you guys might not realize that we're processing." So to Ray's point, what is it that we want you guys to do? We want you to listen, really listen. Ask yourself these couple of questions. Am I really listening? Am I dismissing what is being said because I think I'm already doing that, or I'm not already doing that? And what do I have to do as a listener to add more seats to the table for Black people, as well as make it not necessarily just more welcoming. It doesn't need to be made more welcoming. We need to have the same experience as everybody else does. And that's what we hope that you will process, that you will address with us and that you will get from this session. So with that, I want to start talking with our wonderful panelists and have them, as they're introducing themselves, I would love for them to share with the audience a story of a time where they personally experienced racism or discrimination in the industry. There's one question that I've gotten millions of times, well, that's probably an exaggeration, when I ask people to submit questions in advance. And this is one articulation of that question. I personally would really be interested in hearing some of the quote unquote, you probably think this still isn't happening in 2020, but it is moments that I think would really drive home both how pervasive and complex the issue is, but also allows the audience to envision solutions themselves. So let's start there. Again, as you introduce yourself, please also share a story that you've experienced. And I would love to start with Khary.
Hi, everyone doing? My name is Khary Campbell, currently Assistant Vice President of Research and Innovation with L'Oreal. I've been in the research industry since 2002, and so I've been on both the agency partner side and the client side. And the story I'll share was actually from earlier in my career when I was still on the agency partner side. And it actually is one of the reasons why I continue to pursue a career in market research, because I start to understand the importance of having those voices in the room, if not the voices, at the very least the ears and the eyes. And so at this point I was data collection. So we were in a facility, a focus group, and it was a project that I was the project manager on. And I was checking in with the clients in the back room, and as they're in between their sessions. And I'll just say it was a food and beverage company, and they were doing some advertising checks and some conceptual work. And they felt they weren't connecting with lower income consumers. And they all looked at me in the room, in the back room. And it took me a second, because first I'm like, okay, I'm the partner. I'm not part of this brand conversation. But then they just continued to stare at me, and it hit me. Oh, they're expecting, because you are the one Black person in the room, to be able to speak to poverty and people who are lower income. And that just was not my experience. And whether it was or not, the stereotype just presenting itself in that room was very uncomfortable. And so I did have the opportunity to talk through it with them, but it really highlighted for me, imagine if I were not in that room. Imagine some of the conclusions, some of the assumptions they would have made, some of the stereotypes would continue to move forward with that advertising. And so I did see the finished product probably half a year later. It did evolve quite a bit, but it was still a little tone deaf. And so I can only imagine, had they not had that chance to have an interaction with me, where that would have ended up and what the implications would have been for that company and for that brand.
Thank you, Khary. Whitney, why don't you introduce yourself and share your first story?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Whitney Dunlap-Fowler, founder of my own insights company, Touch of Whit Creative. I started in the industry about 10 years ago with Kantar Added Value, moved over to Kelton Global, and now I'm working for myself. Recently, I founded Insights in Color, which is a diversity initiative for Black and Brown professionals in the insights and research space. And we're really rooted in intentional disruption. It's newly born, but we have a lot of things going on our plate that I'd love to talk about later. You know, when Shannon asked us to answer this question, it was actually quite difficult for me. I think when you are a Black person in this country, you learn how to rationalize experiences. And because racism is less overt than it is in the past, you're often sometimes left asking if an exchange was based on race or discrimination or mistreatment. But Khary's story just jogged a memory for me. That's the other thing, we tend to bury stories, right? I think a common experience I have in this industry, and it can be quite frustrating, is that my face is used to win projects a lot, often without me even being in the room. I've been tokenized in I don't know how many decks for clients doing the right thing, desiring diverse talent on their research projects, but continuing to go to old sources for that research to be done. And for many clients, they tend to be quite satisfied with at least one person of color on those decks and projects, which I think is incorrect. But specifically, I remember, I think I was being asked to work on a project for low-income Black and Brown individuals for a particular beverage that I know not to be healthy. And I kind of said, well, don't you send that project my way. I'm not going to work on that. And I think they tried to position me into that role, and they ultimately gave it to someone else. I think as a Black and Brown researcher in this space, you're often faced with ethical questions of, am I going to work on this project, work on this product that I know might disproportionately negatively affect people like me? And when I'm presented with those issues or moral dilemmas, I tend to say no. I really don't care about the consequence, because at the end of the day, I feel inherently responsible for my community and other people of color like myself. So for me and for other people who look like myself, a project doesn't tend to just be a project, right? It tends to be further reaching implications in our community that we feel that we have a hand in often.
Thank you, Whitney. Carol.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. I feel smarter by being part of this room, part of this conversation. So my role, I shifted from, being on the marketing and media side to doing inclusion and diversity in the advertising industry since 2006. So I've been a collector of, becoming a collector of the graveyard of missteps in the output that results in the crisis of how did that happen and who was in the room and how come nobody said anything. And so my master's thesis was really on, focusing on how inclusion shows up at the top of the house. And so some of the examples that I've seen and heard about are things that haven't even shown up. They were caught. And so people in my role are now being used to check. Unfortunately, that check is happening at the end, right before it's being approved, versus at the front, at the top of the process, where it belongs, where all of you sit. My favorite one is, the H&M campaign with the boy with the monkey sweatshirt. So much of this work is doing the research of the historical context and the nuance to know to even stop that bias from happening. So would love to talk more about how we stop these things, no matter where it is in that process, from the outcomes and the crisis that results.
Thank you, Carol. So just for people who might not understand why the monkey on the shirt on the little Black boy is a problem, can you very briefly
yes,
state
sorry.
the answer?
So, for those of you that missed it, and it shows up, it was a catalog ad that H&M did, and there was a Black boy with a sweatshirt that said, big monkey on the jungle, and there was a white boy next to him that had a, different, non-confrontational label. But the historical context of that is specifically because I think it was done in South Africa. People think that work that's done in different parts of the globe won't resonate in other parts. And so anything that's done, no matter where it is in the world, will show up in social media. And the sweatshirt was offensive because of the historical portrayal of Black people as monkeys. And so to say that you're the best monkey in the jungle is a real trigger for those that are used to the historical visual portrayals of Black people as monkeys. And so there was nobody in the room that had that historical perspective, and there was no checking. What was interesting about that one is that doing a little bit of digging, there was usually somebody that was a person of color in the room. In this particular campaign, not only did they not do the research, but the feedback was, well, the mother was in the room, the mother of the boy was in the room, and she didn't say anything. And like it was her responsibility in a casting, in a shoot, to say something about that. So there were many opportunities to have fixed that. Just simply switching who had what sweatshirt would have been an easy fix if there was some consciousness of the nuances and the historical perspectives of those that are creating that work.
I love the examples that you guys gave, and it also points how the three of you are all in a place right now where you feel that you can say what you think is wrong when it appears. So whether you go back in time or you talk generally, because that's not necessarily the case for all Black people in the insights, research, and marketing space, right? There's a number of steps or filters or switching that's going on. And I want the people who are listening to understand what those are. So if I give you the scenario of, you just arrived at, one of the biggest marketing conferences of the year, and you walk into a session, the door is up front, so everyone is looking at you, and you're walking in, and it's a sea of white faces. What's going through your mind? What are you thinking about, and what are you trying not to do or to do?
Is that open to any of us?
Open to everybody. Yep.
Yeah. So I do a lot of, I just realized I've been doing a panel a week because of COVID, and it's easier. And so sometimes I don't know what the faces are, in this room. But what I'll share is that, I used to feel intimidated earlier in my career by those rooms. And I've come to feel very empowered because it is a moment, and I do a lot of unconscious bias training. So there's a moment of what people see optically, but it is a teachable moment to use that power, because no matter what you say, everything that you will say will have a greater impact than anybody else on that panel, than anybody else in that room. People will remember it, and you'll stand out, just by the sheer nature of that. And so, there's such a small percentage of people that fortunately and unfortunately, we represent a bigger voice. And so the words that we use around how we portray that has way more power to influence a broader amount of people than anybody else in that room, because we're probably the only one that they know, the only one that they've seen, the only one they have a relationship with. So to me, it's very empowering, to be that person, because this is the center of the conversation right now, all over the world, and so it's a huge responsibility that we all have, but it's a huge opportunity to share our voices in a way and to make it a teachable moment.
Yeah. I'd say similar to that, some of the things I've come to recognize is one, I don't have to make other people comfortable. That's not my job, right? I'm certainly going to be very engaging and respectful of people, and I love meeting new people from different cultures, but I shouldn't be the one overextending myself to make sure other people are comfortable in my presence. And I think a lot of minorities and Black people in particular, when they enter into corporate America and they enter into those type of those situations, there can be a sense of pressure to make other people comfortable, to let them know, like, hey, I'm just as good as you, or I'm just as experienced as you, or educated as you. And that's one that I've become very comfortable with, is I'm there for a reason, from a work standpoint, from a performance standpoint. I'm not there to make you comfortable in my presence. And that's something that I think a lot of people grapple with. But I think also, to Carol's point, there's also a bit of added pressure, because in that sea of faces, they're going to remember you, right? And especially if I previously had dreadlocks down the middle of my back. If anyone went to a conference, they can say, yeah, the Black guy with the dreads. Chances are it was me or maybe one other person, right? So it's very easy to identify, versus if we came back and said, man, that white guy from so-and-so company, they weren't the brightest one around. It's kind of, it's like, well, who are you talking about, right? Which one? And so there certainly is that pressure of knowing that all eyes are going to be on you, good or bad. And so you certainly can take a lot of power in that, and that can work to your advantage, and you can help create, whether it's dialogue or better people from a very technical research standpoint, but also recognize that not only are you there as a representation of whichever company you may be working for behalf of, but it's easier for you to be identified, and it is a small industry. And so it's very easy for things to be taken the wrong way. And so in that scenario, which I've faced quite a few times, those are some of the things that I've dealt with.
I've been sitting here trying to rack my brain on what to say, and more so trying to think of how I was when I first entered, not necessarily this industry, but just the corporate workplace. And I'll back up and say, I think if I were to enter any room, even today, majority white people, I'm very, and I hate to go here, but I'm very cognizant of my hair. I'm very cognizant of how much attention it takes away from me and the message that I'm trying to deliver. I tend to wear voluminous, large hair, long, exaggerated hairstyles. It's just a part of who I am. It's not something I'm afraid to express, but it is something that I feel can be a deterrent as to why I'm there and can potentially leak into my other people's perceptions of me as it pertains to intelligence. So I think if it were me, a younger version of me, I probably would have a nice tamed afro, if you will, or twist out, and it would look the way that it needed to look, super neat. And well, I probably would have gotten some attention from somebody saying my hair was super cool, because that's what tends to happen. Or if it were braids, they would have been super neat. But honestly, and it took me a while to think about that, because I'm so comfortable in my own skin now. And I know that that takes with a lot of years of experience, but I never felt intimidated walking into a room full of white people. My background is a bit different. In high school, I recognized, I'm from Virginia. I recognized in high school I was only going to be in corporate America in white rooms in the first place. So I needed to figure that out in college. So I strategically chose a college in the middle of nowhere in Virginia where none of my friends went to, where I was the one and only in my classrooms. And I basically said, if I can succeed here in cow tipping country, then I can succeed anywhere. So I trained myself to be ready for the corporate world. So when I got to that space in Chicago and then New York, I was fine. There were definitely parts of me that I learned to tuck away and push back, as necessary. But I'm telling you, that was short-lived. As soon as I realized I could kind of let my hair down and really kind of be myself, and more than that, that if I'm being honest, my coworkers valued me being that way, then I kind of just leaned into it. Shannon, you and I spoke the other day, and I said I have a really hard time being censored, especially now that I have my own company. I was never that good at being censored in a company, let's be honest. But now, I'm very much outspoken, more than I used to be. And I think one pivotal study that opened my eyes, and sorry, just 2 more minutes here. I did a study for Essence magazine several years ago called the Black Women in the Workplace Study. And it was actually after a Black women in media study. And we talked to all these Black women about the things that they experience in the workplace of all different fields and levels. And it was like a therapy session. It was like, I'm listening to all these women and all these stories, and I'm learning about myself in this process. And my God, how eye-opening. And it was from that project on that I decided, you know what? I'm not going to be this quiet, wait for permission, wait for someone to acknowledge me girl in this research space that was never built for me in the first place. I'm going to be loud. I'm going to let people know that I'm trying to get ahead. I'm going to boast about myself, and I'm going to tell you why I'm a better, unique person to have in this space and to tell these stories. And that is my brand. That's what worked for me. And I know that most researchers, we tend to be introverted. But if anything, this industry has given me is a fight. It's a fighter mentality to say, I am who I think I am, and you're going to see that about me, kind of thing. So, yeah.
It's interesting, the dichotomy between the tone that you guys are sharing these stories, where it's from a sense of empowerment, but there's so much on your shoulders and so much still that you guys had to think about to even arrive where you are right now. And I don't think that people outside of our community necessarily understand or see that, of all that's going on, and all that it took to get to where we are right now. I'm curious, what stereotypes about Black people or Black professionals do you find the most infuriating, whether it's one you've come across before personally, or you haven't come across but you've heard somebody else come across. What do you want to stop?
I can say the first thing for me. It's the angry Black woman stereotype. And I can say that not only in my professional life, but in my regular life. In fact, it's become a detriment to my personality, because I've tried to avoid that stereotype most of my life, so much so that people have taken me for granted in many situations, and bad things where I should have stood up for myself have happened because I was afraid to be perceived in a particular way. I think that we should be able to be passionate without being dinged for it or negatively impacted by it. And there's nothing wrong with passion. There's nothing wrong with, loving to talk about a topic or to express yourself about a thing. But the angry Black woman stereotype, that actually showed up one time in the workplace, long time ago, and I was in Chicago. I was on the billing and accounting side trying to collect something from a client and who hadn't paid. And this guy who knew me fairly well, once he realized that the client hadn't been paying, basically said, "Oh, I know Whitney's gonna give them the business." And he did this like neck roll, finger snap thing, kind of saying like, "This is what I would do" in a professional setting with a client. And I just said, "Why would I do that? Have you ever seen me act this way?" And the answer was no. So yeah, I don't like any of those things. That's
Carol and Khary.
Yeah, so I'll build on that. And it's interesting, I hear less about the angry Black woman. And, I grew up in an all-white neighborhood, so I can relate to Whitney's approach to culture. And I've been doing kind of an unofficial mental survey of people that are able to navigate this space versus those that struggle. And those that are able to navigate the cultures and organizations, either they're army brats or they grew up in an in an environment where they had to get used to different cultures, or they went to a non-HBCU school. People that have never had these experiences, or those that come from immigrant families. So there's a perspective if you're coming from an immigrant family that's very different than those that have been kind of, born and raised through the trauma of, racism in this country. But the angry Black woman doesn't come up so much. But one of the things that I noticed that I do is I smile a lot more when I'm trying to make a point as a coping mechanism for that perception of, because I'm tall, right? So I'm tall anyway, and I have short hair. So there's a whole lot of stuff that people don't talk about that shows up. So my strategy is relationship building and to smile a lot to manage that bias around that. But it's the aggressiveness, for those that are extroverted or sometimes triggered, how things trigger us may show up to other people as being too sensitive. So they think that we're too sensitive and more aggressive because we need to get we're not being respected and valued in that conversation, in that meeting. So it comes off as much more aggressive than they're comfortable with. And then there's that people of color, there's cultural differences around communication style. We're doing a project, an assessment in our office in a few weeks because European cultural styles and indirectness is not part of, warm cultural styles. They're more relationship driven. They're much more direct in that communication style. So there's a communication style in organizations that's more indirect and more subtle. And Black people tend to be much more direct. So that shows up in ways that people are not comfortable with, but they also don't talk about. The other one that I'll just, that's something that I wrestle with when I'm doing career coaching is the keep your head down syndrome, right? So cultures, whether they're Latin, Asian, or Black, we've taught our children to keep your head down, do the work, get good grades, don't cause too much of a distraction, and you will be noticed. And the consequence of that is that we're not always paying attention to our relational dynamics. And we're not as forceful about self-promotion, because that's not part of our cultural DNA. That's not wrong, it's just a different culture. So organizations are built and designed for straight European white men. So anything that's different from that is gonna feel like it's something you're doing wrong. So keeping our head down is something that is part of each of those cultural dynamics in terms of how we're raised, to just do the hard work, you know, work twice as much, but keep your head down. But often we get dinged in the stereotype of not being part of and not participating in, and not raising our hand and not leaning in, and not self-promoting as much as other groups do, particularly white men do. So that's some of the things that we wrestle with in terms of the conflict of our own personal culture and organizational cultures, which is why, you know, people do what Whitney does and they, you know, opt out.
Yeah, I'd say certainly building on what Whitney and Carol talked about, especially what Carol just mentioned. In the corporate settings, in these companies, career progression doesn't just happen, especially not if you're a Black person, right? And it does become a bit of a balancing act of, okay, where do I promote myself, my work, my qualifications? How do I network? How do I be the truth teller that we need to be as researchers? If nothing else, you need to learn to be a truth teller as a researcher, whether it's on behalf of your consumers, your brand, the products. And if you cannot bring that into the conversation, into the room, you're not doing yourself justice, you're not doing that business justice, and you're not doing those for either in your network or that you can help bring along any justice in that, right? And so it's a delicate situation. I've seen several times where people have been labeled the angry Black person in the room. And I've seen some of the conversations behind doors or in conversations with executives where then becomes the person's maturity is questioned. Where I guarantee you I've been in enough of those conversations where that same interaction from somebody who's not Black, maturity does not come into that question. It doesn't come into that conversation. And those are the things that can derail career progression. And as we talk about being able to influence these decisions, influence how research is being used, if you're not able to progress, you're not going to be in those conversations and some of those decision-making meetings where it's absolutely critical to have different perspectives in the room, right? And so it is really, how do you balance that? You can't keep your head down because it's not going to happen. The work by itself, the merit part of it, isn't all it takes to progress, right? But by the same stroke of that conversation, you don't want to be labeled as the angry or super aggressive Black person, right? Because that's going to work against you as well. But how do you do that in an authentic way? Why would you have to censor yourself? And certainly in a respectful manner, but why does it have to become part of your day-to-day balancing act? And so that's certainly something I've faced, and I'm almost certain everyone who's been in that role or positions faces.
Shannon, can I add to this? Or
Sure.
are we running out of time?
No, go ahead. I will moderate to the time.
Okay. I just want to pick back up on what both Carol and Khary said. When we talk about what it is to be a Black person in the corporate space, we are taught from birth that we have to work twice as hard to get anywhere in life. It's ingrained in us. If it's not said explicitly, it's implied, and that's just what we know. It seems that that piece of us is a bit of a culture conflict in a lot of these spaces. And when I was talking about the angry Black woman, you know, my passion for what I do is honestly rooted in that I have to work hard so that I can be seen as equal, as intelligent, as capable as possible in any kind of situation. But what that kind of hits up against are people who are not Black, who don't really care about their jobs, you know, who don't really care about the next promotion. They don't really, you know, they kind of landed where they've landed. They got, you know, in because of a referral. They got in because they're a friend of a friend. It's not that big of a deal, you know. And so I think that Black people especially, we come into the workplace very seriously, right? Got to check these boxes. Got to let people know I'm supposed to be here. And that takes out, as Carol was mentioning, that takes our personality away from the context of whatever the culture is we're supposed to be contributing to that's based on white men. So it's something that we have to learn how to balance. It's still necessary, but we have to make sure that we don't come off robotic in that way, because I'm just going to reiterate this. The more I've kind of stepped away from that only come here to do work mentality, the more successful I've become, and made some lifetime friends about that. Carol, I am a military brat, by the way. Yeah, made some lifetime friends because of it. But the letting your hair down, it's both. It's a chore for us to step away from what we've been told to do, but also work extremely hard so that we can feel that we are seen and getting those raises, promotions, and roles that we're supposed to be looking for.
So what we've been discussing for the majority of our time today, is it just present in all industries, or is any of this unique to the insights, research, and adjacent marketing advertising fields?
So, having, I've advised across industries for many years, and, starting with media and advertising and marketing, but have been advising. So, the race conversation is inherent everywhere. The more intersectionality that will have. So, the black gay guy is going to struggle even more than the black woman will, right? So, and if you have disabilities or even veteran status, the more intersections you have outside of that, the more you're going to struggle. But it's inherent in every company, and for a lot of reasons. Part of it is design, quite frankly, right? So we as a country have been very uncomfortable talking about race, and doing diversity and inclusion work over the last 10, 15 years. It's been intentionally numbed and dialed down race, and gender was turned up. And we know that that conversation was really focused on that dimension without consideration about the intersectionality of gender. So the benefit of that has been, increases for white women, but not any of the intersections around any of that. So it's not unique to this business. Where it will continue to be a challenge is that the more, research and the insights is such a quiet niche. And so without visibility and awareness, and, can't get me started on the educational system, it's not supporting greater awareness and greater, support for people coming into this business. So if you know someone, if you fell into it, if, you had that great teacher, maybe you know about it and you hear about it, but it's, it's not designed for improvements without a lot of intentionality to support the educational system which is in, which moves against it, which fights against awareness and educational support across different groups.
There's a lot of questions that I still want to ask you guys, and we don't have that much time. So I want to skip ahead a bit. And though I said at the beginning that we're as Blacks in the industry, we're not here alone to provide the solutions. I do want to begin to talk to our audience about what we see as some of the solutions could be that they could build on. So let's just rapid fire, quickly say where it is an issue and what a possible solve might be, and let's just rattle a few off. And anyone can start first.
So I can start. We're in the process. So my philosophy, and I see some questions about what to do. Embedding this into processes is critical. And so where our research and strategy group is building out and announcing a polycultural offering, but it's really an approach to the work. And so, the processes globally that we're doing to break down, how do we design and discover to support clients, you have to intentionally build and design the bias interrupters in the process to stop, to have a moment to understand who's in the room, what do you need to know, who are we researching, who's analyzing the insights, are the insights being lost in the creative process? But you have to build it into the system or else it won't just happen. And the more you do that recalibration around who is part of the pitches, who is part of the insights, who's doing this, has to be built into the culture of the company and the processes, then you start to notice, people will start to notice something that they'd never noticed before was, wow, we don't really have that insight. We don't really think about that. And we're seeing client RFPs asking more specific questions about not just who's doing the work, but what is your approach to this? And I think it's going to be a competitive advantage for companies, for researchers, for research services to really build it into their process and embed it. So they're thinking about it, they're asking the right questions, they're hiring the right vendors and suppliers to do that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Khary.
You go. No, you go.
I'm just going to ask you to repeat the question.
Sorry.
Identify an issue or unmet need in the insights research marketing space, and
well, you already know what I'm going to say, Shannon.
I do, but I just want you to say it anyway.
This whole industry is broken. The whole thing. Throw it away. Start all over. It's wrong. 100%. That's how Insights and Color got started. And we're really trying to work on getting rid of these antiquated ways in that were built for white men, then eventually white women, because they held the purse strings, if you will, and still are built around that same framework. It's all wrong. And I think it's arrogant for people to go into research thinking they know all the answers. And it happens all the time. It happens every day. I think it's more arrogant when people think that they can tell our stories. And that happens definitely all the time. That is a colonialist perspective. And it happens all the time when being owned by a British company when I was working at my first company, they told us all the time what they thought the insights were here in the United States of America. What? The gall of you to say that. And so even as a Black person who works in the multicultural space, which is one of my jobs, by the way, it's not my sole job just because I'm a Black researcher, just want to put that out there. Being a Black person, people think that I can speak for all the ethnicities. Oh, Whitney, can you talk to me about Hispanics? Can you talk to me about Asians? I don't know. I can tell you what I think I know, and I'm going to contact my Hispanic or Latinx and Asian friends in the business so they can have a better purview on this. I think this idea of me being the be-all holder of information is what's wrong with this industry. And that is a very white male mentality, right? Like, I know all the answers. There's nothing wrong with saying you don't know. I don't know. That makes me a better researcher because I'm asking these questions, right? I'm asking what's different about this? What don't I know about it? We ask a lot of the same questions, and so we get a lot of the same answers. And so we go into research thinking that we're going to know who our segments are and what they look like and what their lifestyles are, instead of just working from scratch and saying, actually, there's a different way we can come at this. There's no way this world is this diverse, this country is this diverse, this generationally divided, and we're getting all the same answers. There's no way. You know what I mean? So yeah, throw the whole industry away. Start over. That's my answer.
Khary, how are you going to follow up that?
All right.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we just throw things away now, right? What I would say is really the thing I put out there is for people to have empathy. You've got to have empathy when it comes to dealing with your coworkers, if you're dealing with a client, if you're speaking, listening to, trying to understand consumers. Because I'm not going to sit here and say we have the monopoly on oppression. People deal with things across all races, backgrounds, ethnicities, however you want to think about it. But we do know a very nuanced part of it, something that only we experience, I think, at mass levels, right? And so an example I'll give is, you're calling people in to come into a focus group at a certain time, certain location, or even myself to be there as a client. But have you ever thought about what they go through to get there? Right. So for me, I've caught myself doing this a couple of times. Man, which route did I see less police yesterday? Because chances are if I get pulled over, it's a fact. There's a higher chance that I'm going to be arrested, that I could be shot, I could be killed, right? We just see now what's happening in Wisconsin. Like, I shouldn't have to think about that when I swipe my badge to leave work. That I'm trying to think, where did I see the least amount of police the other day, right? So I can get my way home, right? I shouldn't have to think that my teenage son, you know, we are researchers at heart. I think one of the stats I saw recently is that although African American youth make up 15% of the population, they make up 35% of juvenile detention arrests, right? I shouldn't have to be sitting there saying, you know, I have to get out of this focus group soon, because there's a chance if my son is left out there and he has to find his way home, he could find himself arrested for no good reason, right? And so sometimes it's just having that empathy to understand what people are going through and try to find a way to put yourself in their shoes. And how does that come back to you through the research, through the data we're getting, through the verbatims, through the ethnographies, right? And so I think the more you can open yourself up to having those conversations and facing those hard truths, the better we all become as research professionals.
And I think I talked to each one of you a little bit about this. I want to add to it. It's just making sure that there are different people around you throughout all phases of the research. So whether you are throwing out the industry like Whitney wants to do, when you rebuild it, make sure that there is a diversity of people, and not just skin color, but, you know, experience levels, where they've come from, whether they have a college degree or not, and looking to increase the number of those people, including us, at all levels and in all places, so that things like the example Khary gave at the beginning with the little boy with the monkey on his sweatshirt has less chance of happening. In the last, maybe before I turn it back over to Ray, and I know for those who are listening, yes, there's a hell of a lot more questions. I have like five Microsoft Word pages of questions that I cut from this guide, and I still didn't even get through the guide because I went off script. And we will talk to the panelists. We'll ask them very nicely if we can do a part two. But before, as I said, before I turn it over to Ray, what's the one thing that you guys want people to know or to do to help increase the number of Black people in the industry, to help keep us there and to see us in the higher ranks or in the places of influence? Khary, why don't we start with you?
Be an advocate, be an ally, recognize that there need to be different perspectives and different experiences in those conversations, in those rooms, in those plannings and designs. If at any one case you're only seeing one point of view, one experience, one voice, it's going to be biased, and you're not going to get the end result that you're looking for. Whether it's a business result, whether it's a culture building result within your company, whether it's developing people and developing those relationships, it's not going to happen. And so it's absolutely critical to find ways to be that voice, that advocate, that ally, and understand what that means. Do the work to understand what that means. You know, I can give you suggestions, but we're not here. The Black people in your life are not there to teach you how to do it, right? So those are the words I would impart.
Carol?
I'll say 1.5 things. So, you know, as researchers, having a growth mindset and being curious is what you're known for. So there shouldn't be a moment where you don't make sure that you're asking the question, who's missing from this conversation? What don't I know? And that is a growth mindset philosophy. And then the other half is look at your social network on LinkedIn and view it, scan it to see how narrow it is. And if there's not a representative sampling of people of different ethnicities and dimensions, then be intentional and build and broaden that network so you have people to tap into to respond to the questions that you're going to ask as an advocate and an ally.
Great. And Whitney, the thrower outer of the industry.
actually had a good response and I've totally forgotten it. So I'm just going to leave this with my Black and brown people in the industry. It's really important that we figure out ways to become the architects of our own stories. There's too many people who are not us trying to tell us about who we are in this space and trying to tell brands who we are. So we need to get into the space a lot more in a bigger way and make sure that we stay in this space. Someone asked me, is the answer just to leave the industry and start your own business? That shouldn't be the answer. There are a lot of Black women who, like myself, who have left because they just couldn't take the office politics, and that creates a vacuum of knowledge and information. So, you know, I want Black and brown people to understand that there is an awareness gap. We need to fill this gap, and we need to fill in the pipelines of research so that we can start creating our own stories and tell it the way that it needs to be told.
And that's definitely one of the purposes of Whitney's group, the Insights in Color. So definitely check that out. It's insightsincolor.com. If you are joining us from Europe or elsewhere overseas, you can also check out Color of Research. That's color spelled C-O-L-O-U-R, colorofresearch.org. And then the QRCA, the Qualitative Research Professional Association, for those Black people in the audience who are looking for a community to talk about some of these issues, to find support. We do have a monthly Black MRX chat, and you can find more details about that on qrca.org/diversity. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ray.
Thank you, Shannon, and thank you everybody on the panel, and thank you so much everybody who's been contributing to the chat stream.